Hey,
Hi. Hi, Shruti. How are you
hi.
doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I am good.
Good. So
Yeah.
nice to see you. Thank
I
you for doing
know.
this with us.
Not at all. I'm really grateful to be asked. Thank you. Yeah.
It's
And
um sorry, go ahead.
no, I was saying it's a great initiative that you're doing the series. So I'm really grateful to be the one to talk to you about food, which is our joint favorite thing to talk about anyway.
I know. I feel like most of the time when we've spoken, it's either been food or photography.
Yeah.
So, and yesterday we actually had, Maya Scumley who was talking about photography and
I
wildlife, but
saw.
you know, yeah. So, I mean, this is really exciting because food has been, I guess, a part of our lives for a very long time in terms of like the intensity to which we sort of look at it. So thank you so much for doing this and bringing your insight and everything to this. So I think we can just get started. We can get going. So everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for in continuing Damara Leisure Experiences conversations around responsibility and environmental responsibility, particularly leading up to World Environment Day on the 5th. We have been having conversations with diverse and innovative climate advocates, and today I'm so happy to be talking to Sarah Nicole Edwards. Anyone who has questions during this session, please do drop them in the chat. And Sarah, I know you know how to do this really well. So if you'd like to, we can pick it up from there, or at the end of the session, we can sort
Yeah.
of get into those questions. So Sarah, you and I have known each other for a little while, but I'll give everyone out there sort of just an introduction to who you are and what your work has been like over the last couple of years. Sarah is the founder of Copper and Cloves, which is a plant-based farm-to-table cafe using locally grown ingredients. She's also a food and brand consultant and conducts workshops and coaching on the subject of eating and living well. Something I think that is really, really important, especially in this time where we're seeing so much burden really on the planet due to our eating habits and our eating styles. So, Sarah, again, thank you so much. So happy to have an expert like you who's not just sort of somebody who talks, but you really walk the talk, and what you're doing in terms of your work. You're really like out there and you're doing it yourself. And so it's really wonderful to have somebody like you who's able to bring practical knowledge to a subject like this.
Thank
So just
you.
to get things kicked
Yeah.
off, would you mind telling us a little bit about your journey into clean eating and some of the personal shifts that you had to make along the way? And also, this has been something that you've sort of created a profession around. So what did it take to build an active skill set that would sustain these changes that you made?
Yeah, no, I think that it's a really helpful way of looking at it. I mean, there are certain shifts that you have to, go through to change the way, you eat. I was lucky in the sense that my mom had a very like health centric and she was like way ahead of the curve when it came to organic, being aware about the need to eat organic rather than just kind of whatever was available. She sought out kind of, we used to go to the health food shop when we were little, and the crisps that I had in the playground weren't the kind of brands that my friends had. They were some like Nature's Harvest, whatever. And I remember obviously hating it at the time, being like, I just want to be cool and eat the normal crisps. But it definitely influenced me to just have a little bit more awareness around it. But of course, then, I went through the normal kind of uh, on autopilot when I was a student, eating unhealthily, eating a lot of packaged foods. And the shift for me towards like healthy eating, which to me is eating whole foods, minimally processed. That's what healthy eating means to me. The plant-based shift came a bit later. Um, but it was a lot to do with how the shift of kind of I felt it in my health. You know, I was in my early 20s and early to mid 20s, and I was just, my immunity was very, very poor. I was, I was very much caught in a tendency to diet and then binge. So eat all the foods, all the packaged foods, what we would call kind of junk foods, and then go on a diet. And it was a really painful kind of cycle, to be honest, and it wasn't sustainable, and it had nothing to do with health. And I think when I then sort of, came back to a lot of what my mum has always said, which is thinking about whole foods. So rather than thinking about calories, that was the biggest shift. It was a shift from thinking about calories and weight and aesthetics to thinking about, what am I eating? Like, what is a whole, what are whole foods? Like, just in their natural form as much as possible. Vegetables, right, fruits, whole grains, nuts, seeds, rather than some, diet packet of biscuits which promised me that each one is only 80 calories or something. So that was a big thing for me. And that, that did become augmented when I then trained to be a health and nutrition coach. And of course, then that really just made me really think very carefully. So that was the biggest shift. And the impact on my health was, not only did I stop worrying so much about my weight and it stabilized as a result, but also, it was my immunity. It was the biggest thing. It was the biggest thing for me. It was that I used to get every cold going. Like, oh, I've got another cold, or I'm feeling like a bit sniffly again. And I didn't really think that that was unusual, but I now feel very, like, I don't know, my immunity, I know that I would describe myself as somebody that doesn't get sick often. And that was a big thing as well, in terms of the shift for me towards whole foods. And of course, another big thing was when I moved to India, I became a lot more aware of plastic and waste. And that's partly the people that I met here and interacted with, including one of my best friends here, who is like an absolute Sahar, who is, a zero waste. She has a brand, but she also lives that. And that really just made me aware. And I think that goes hand in hand with healthy eating, because the more whole foods you eat, the less plastic, single-use packaging is involved. Mm-hmm. So that was a really big thing. And in terms of the skills, I think there were two key shifts for me. One is I've always loved cooking and always been pretty good at cooking. But I mean, when I was young, I was very much cooking for taste, and I was, I'd make pies and cakes and whatever, and learning how to make predominantly plant-based, healthy cooking taste good was a skill set. And there was a chef called Ottolenghi. I don't know whether you've heard of him, but he's quite famous in the UK, and he had a very plant-centric. He's not a vegan chef by any means, but he had a plant-centric way of cooking and just about infusing flavor into everything. And that was a huge learning. When I started cooking that way, I was like, oh, this is healthy food, and everybody thinks it tastes amazing. And that's been a huge part of my journey. And there's one other skill which I think is really relevant here, and it's learning to read labels. That is such an important skill, because I used to kind of look at the back of foods and look at that nutrition table and be like, oh, I can't really make sense of this, but I think, okay, it seems to be high in sugar, so maybe that's bad, or it seems to be high in protein, so maybe that's good. But I mean, I didn't really know anything. And when I realized that actually the thing to read is the ingredients list, for, that table is actually not that relevant. It's not, unless you are unless you're really into nutrition and have studied it, you're not going to be able to make sense of it. What you need to be able to read is the ingredients list. So, can you see what ingredients are in there? What is the first ingredients are listed according to the most prevalent to least prevalent in that order? Are there chemicals in there? Are there numbers that you don't understand? Is it claiming to be a health food, but actually the second ingredient is high fructose corn syrup? Like, learning to read ingredients lists is really, really important. And it's much more important than learning to understand nutrition tables, in my opinion. But that made a big difference for me in terms of being able to, if I am eating something with more than one ingredient, to be able to look at that thing and go, okay, is this actually what it's marketed as or not?
Right. Yeah. When you were mentioning that health, like your health improved, right? You were saying like your immunity improved.
Yeah.
And I think that also links back to sort of what you're saying in the nutrition, in the ingredients list, right? Because what it would seem to me is that you're then having a more balanced diet, right? You're actually including things from all over, and it's and that itself, like, kind of, it's almost like it's doing the work of a multivitamin.
Exactly.
The food itself is sort of working for you.
It's so important. And you know, that's why, I mean, one of the other kind of skills, I guess, or things which I realized is, instead of calorie counting or even trying to balance macros and all these other things which are really popular on social media, just eating a balanced diet and eating the rainbow, for example, being one of the things I love to talk about, like trying to eat as many different colors, say not necessarily in a day, but say if you take a week of your life, like how many different colors of fruits and vegetables are you actually eating? Or are you tending to eat maybe a lot of the same thing, maybe a lot of the same healthy thing, but are you really getting that that spectrum of what is available in nature? And as you said, that is the multivitamin. I mean, that is the spectrum of vitamins and compounds available in nature, antioxidants that are good for us. And we need that variety in order to really, you know, get everything that we need.
Yeah, actually, in Ayurvedic concept, so we have this property that we launched a few months ago at Tamara called Amal Tamara. And when I went there and I did my sort of, you know, my treatment plan, at one point they gave me a chart, and it essentially said, eat more of this, eat less of this. It never said, don't eat something. Yeah. And I think that's really important, right? Because we do, in our body, we need everything in sort of these varying quantities, even salt for that matter.
Yeah,
you know?
Like, exactly.
We do need that, right? Even though we say, okay, don't eat so much, you're going to get blood pressure and this and that. But like, your body actually does need balance. And I think what you're saying really resonates well with me in that. So, you know, you mentioned you like cooking, but there's a lot of us, me included, not great at cooking. And so, you know, and similarly, there are several challenges that sort of get in the way of a person being able to maintain a certain diet, and particularly, I would say, a plant-based diet, which is not, you know, I guess it's limiting in certain senses, right? So what do you think are some of these, do you have any tips in terms of solutions for that? Or, you know, anything from, and I mean, it's not just in terms of habit, right? Even access to really good vegetables, for instance, and fruits, like that can be a challenge sometimes. So having viable products, making time for meal prep, and even the psychology behind it, right? You said for you as well, like it was a bit of a journey to get to that point where you were able to kind of do this and then maintain it, and it was sort of step by step. So any advice around how you can face those challenges, and, you know, and various other ones as well?
Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of challenges, so for me it was a big challenge, for example, to take to basically become plant-based. So I definitely you know, I definitely struggled with that because I was a foodie. You know, I was, you know, I love cooking, I love going to restaurants. I considered myself, like, it was part of letting go of like a foodie identity that like loved a perfectly like slow cooked meat, whatever it was, you know.
Yeah.
And the restriction that comes along with that when eating out. And I think there's a big part of me that's like, oh, I don't want to be that fussy one, you know. I don't want to be the one that's like, actually, I can't eat that. And I really struggle with, you know, I don't want to be the one making a fuss, and I don't want to seem like I'm like kind of, you know, and that was a big psychological shift. I'm really lucky. One of my best friends was a very early adopter. So I had been exposed to the idea that you can be plant-based and be, you know, and participate normally. But my biggest tip for that is, honestly, don't get too attached to a label. This is for the psychological part of it. You know, don't decide you have to be a vegan and then you are a vegan and everybody knows you're a vegan and then you're scared to take the plunge and it seems like a big thing and you don't want to be the fussy one. Just think about moving towards a more plant-centric way of eating. So I consider myself plant-based. You know, 99% of the time I eat only plants. But I don't like using the term vegan because you know, you're basically making a statement about future events that you don't know, you know, what situations you might be in, where, and how do you define, you know, I think, you know, where there comes along with declaring yourself a vegan, a lot of, and some people are completely ready to, and that's fine. But a lot of people aren't ready to, and therefore they kind of reject the notion rather than saying like, can I move towards a more plant-centric way of eating? So, you know, there's things like Meat-Free Mondays. That's like a trending, you know, hashtag across the globe. Have 1 or 2 days where you don't have meat as a part of your meal and experiment with plant-based alternatives. I think that if you also just think about literally the, you know, the proportions on your plate, can they be more plant-centric and just think about eating, like reducing your consumption, whether it's for health or environment reasons. I do think that thinking in that way is a really helpful way of kind of getting over the hurdle that can be like switching. Like you don't need to switch, you can just gravitate towards and see the impact that it has. So I do believe that, you know, from a sustainable and environment, we are talking about sustainability and environment here, and becoming more plant-centric and reducing your meat intake, you know, it's not really up for debate that is better for the environment now. We know that. It's not the debate that this conversation is about. So if you're thinking from a more sustainable point of view, reducing dairy, meat and fish consumption by not giving it up, but reducing is I think a psychologically very helpful. And I think in terms of practicalities, yes, it can be challenging sometimes to get good quality produce, but in India it's not very difficult and expensive to get hold of vegetables. I think the time constraint is really the practical issue of learning, and this is something which I talk about a lot, to cook smart, like learning to, I think it's very interesting since I moved to India that I notice that because people don't, this is when I go on my rant about the joys of an oven, but ovens aren't the traditional way of cooking, right? It's not, most Indian kitchens, unlike in the West, don't have an inbuilt oven. I mean, increasingly they do, but most actually don't. When I was looking for an apartment, I didn't find any. And so, but the good thing is these tabletop OTGs from Chroma are about $5,000 and they work extremely well. So it's not a problem. But it's a lot easier to cook plant-based veggies when you know how to use an oven, because you prep them, put them in, put the tray in the oven, and then you have 45 minutes to go and do something else. Whereas when you're cooking in a more traditional way in India and you're stirring on the stove, you can't leave the area. And I mean, it's just such a small thing, but I was noticing, why is it taking much longer to cook something which in theory doesn't take that long? But you have to be there the whole time and you have to watch it. But oven cooking, you don't. So my biggest tip to people is invest in an OTG from Chroma or whatever. It doesn't have to be an inbuilt kind of branded German imported oven. Like a simple tabletop oven is a great way. And then I have lots of recipes for tray bakes, which is a way of getting a lot of flavor into vegetables. You just cut them up, toss them in, a bit of oil, some spices, some herbs, squeeze of lemon, a little bit of chili or paprika, and then put them in the oven and forget about them. And you can do that on a Sunday, a couple of trays. And then you have stuff in your fridge to make stuff throughout the week, rather than each day being like, okay, right, what am I going to make? I'm going to prep it now, and I'm going to cook it now. So that's, a big tip for eating in a plant-based way, where you can get a lot done with minimal effort, and you're not then going to be tempted to order in, which, even again, that this is a talk about sustainability in food. Packaging is obviously a big concern with ordering in. But I do think that it's not difficult in this day and age to switch to eating in a plant-based way, in terms of finding those alternatives, because we live in an age where there are WhatsApp groups, there are social media. Like, it's not difficult on Instagram to find and become connected to who's making good quality organic tofu or tempeh in India. I'm talking obviously from a quite Bangalore-centric point of view, but I know if you're living in an urban environment, it's not that difficult now to get hold of oat milk, to get hold of tofu. And that's changed in the last 6 years since I've lived here in a massive way. I do give a lot of kind of tips and stuff on my account to try and help people find these things.
I think the interesting thing about tray bakes as well, it's been a while since I lived outside of India, and I had to sort of, cook for myself every meal and things like that. But when I was living in New York, actually, tray bakes, I used to do them, not because I was plant-based or anything. And I might, at that time, I might put a piece of fish on it as well.
Or chicken legs or whatever.
Right. But the interesting thing about it also was that it's very easy to do it in the amount that is appropriate for that meal. Right. So you're actually wasting way less food. Because you're like, okay, I'm this hungry in an hour or whatever, 30 minutes, like I'm going to want to eat this much. And you just take that much amount and you stick it on the tray, you prep it and you put it in. And I found it especially when I was living alone, it was, it was great, because you just need, you need a couple of ingredients and everything else is in your pantry. But very, really simple and sustainable in terms of like how often you can do it. Sustainability in the sense of like being able to manage it from a time perspective. That's a really good point. And your food at the cafe, for instance, I know you're saying don't order in, but I love your food. I'm a huge fan of your food. I order it and, all the time. And you have, I like the packaging that you use as well, because I believe you do use sustainable packaging as well.
We use only, so the Areca Palm boxes that we send, sort of 80% of the food that we deliver is in an Areca Palm box that you can literally tear up and put in your home compost and it will biodegrade. So that's one way that we, we manage that. And then the other things like the boxes are we get from a company called Bamboo, which are doing sustainable, renewable bamboo, and it's also biodegradable. Not as fast as the Areca Palm, but we do try and manage that. But it's very kind that you, and I'm so glad you like the food. And most of it is based on a tray bake. When people say like, oh, how is the farm to table salad so tasty? And basically it's roasted vegetables, like roasted brinjal, capsicum, onions, garlic, like all roasted until they're caramelized. And then it's tossed with a grain or a lentil, some leaves and a dressing, and just sort of all tossed together. And that's how we make the salad. So the tray bake is like foundational to all of Copper and Cloves dishes, actually.
Yeah. Amazing. Have you seen, and I'm sure you have, seen success stories of people that have engaged with Copper and Cloves, come into the cafe or otherwise, right? People you've coached, and you said you started out as a health and nutrition
Yeah,
fact, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I still am. I do still have a couple of clients, so I am a health and nutrition coach, but it's not something that I've really, expanded because I wanted to focus on the cafe. I think, there are a lot of, there are lots of really great things. I think, we have a meal subscription program for people that really don't know how to or have the inclination to cook at all, and who, for whom resources aren't such a constraining factor. So they might get, like, say, their breakfast and lunch delivered, plant-based, healthy, a couple of times a week. And we have somebody that, he would describe himself as like a hardcore non-vegetarian, and those are his meatless days, where he's just like, but I love the food and I really, really enjoy it on those days. And it's definitely, he says it's definitely helped him to shift from the idea that, fun, tasty food is always the non-veg kind of option, right? Like that he's realized that he looks forward to his plant-based meals from Copper and Cloves, more than anything else in the week. So that's really, really nice. And a lot of people do say, that because of the way that we don't see flavor and taste as secondary to health, the food is anyway healthy because we only use whole ingredients. But then our job is to get as much flavor in as possible. So a lot of people feel like, well, I didn't realize that eating healthily or eating plant-based could be this tasty. So that's something which I hear a lot, and it really does mean a lot, because that is the mission. And also, my own dad, he has actually, an early adopter, has been vegetarian since I was about 8 years old. But he was vegetarian in order to lower his had diagnosed with high cholesterol. But he, he tended to like eat a lot of flavored yogurts or kind of, biscuits or like crackers and when I started to learn about it,
Processed foods.
Yeah, kind of healthy but processed foods. And I was like helping him to see that, okay, but maybe I'm not here to convert anybody to give up dairy or meat if they're not ready to. So, and I work with people to help them to think about whole foods first, and plant and incorporating more plants, and not actually focus on what they need to cut out, much more about what they need to add in. And that's generally something I believe as a much more effective way of moving towards healthy eating. So helping to see, like, well, rather than having a berry flavored yogurt, which actually, if you read the ingredient, the marketing is amazing. It's like, well, this will lower your cholesterol, and it's, it's full of vitamin C, more than you need each day. And when you actually look at the ingredients, it's full of sugar and artificial flavorings and sweeteners to make it that flavor. And I was like, well, Dad, why don't you have like some Greek yogurt, full fat Greek yogurt, and some berries and a drizzle of, honey or some nut butter alongside that.
Right.
And, and he would enjoy that so much more as well. And it's kind of more, and, sprinkle some seeds on top. And so you still got your snack, but it's made from whole foods, and it doesn't take long to prepare. So, that's something that I try and help people to do, and see that sometimes, there is a lot of crazy marketing out there in the health food world. And when we learn to read ingredients and we learn to come up with simple alternatives, like, again, making your own, instead of having a snack bar, a healthy granola bar that, again, contains actually a lot of high fructose corn syrup. Can you have, I don't know, a date with some nut butter and some nuts on top of it, or something like that, that will satiate you just as much, actually way more, and is kind of whole foods focused.
Cool. Sorry, my son just came in. You want to show everyone your invention? He invented this.
Wow, that's
Cool.
amazing. He is going places.
It's a chair. Thanks, Sarah. No, so I mean, I think the example that you give of your dad, I feel like that's a really fantastic success story because it's not like you said, right? If you start with taste, I mean, you're not
Yeah,
really changing. There's a driving force from within, right? It becomes because you can't necessarily internalize, maybe what you're told or what you read, right? People can tell you 1,000
yeah,
times like doing this or eating
yeah,
that is bad for you, but until like you're truly convinced of it internally, you're not really going to make that change. So I think, leading by taste, it makes a lot of
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And if you get, yeah, your food is amazing. I love your food anyway. But
Thank
yeah, so I'm sure
you.
it's not too difficult to convince. But yeah, um, on an individual level,
Yeah,
what do you find are some of the approaches to wellness that can help us make incremental changes to redefine our relationship with our own bodies and
yeah,
what we put in them, right? So, like, how do you
yeah,
find that, I mean, like, you did mention, like, you take things
yeah,
slowly and you don't jump to the end really or to the,
yeah,
to the conclusion. But do you think that there's anything else that, like, all of us can really do in terms of, just small things that we could do maybe on a
yeah.
daily basis?
I do. And I do, like I said, for me, a lot of, really switching to a sustainable whole foods way of eating had a huge, I had to let go of labels and dieting and
Mm,
calorie focus. So that, I know it's difficult. I do believe that it's really important that we learn to practice body acceptance and focus on our habits rather than decide an end goal of how we want to look or a number on the scale and work backwards. Like that is the prevailing norm, and that is what a lot of people will tell you is the way that
mm,
you should have a goal in mind and then work backwards from there. What do you need to do to get there? It is a paradigm shift, but no, like, practice body acceptance now. And there's a couple of things that I'll talk about, but the overall principle is accept yourself now and focus on the things to do and accept that those things are good for you, whole
mm,
foods, moving your body in a way that feels good to you, prioritizing sleep, which is just such an important one that nobody does,
yeah.
or that nobody kind of puts at the forefront. Things to do with stress management, whether that's having a practice, a meditation practice, a gratitude practice, but things that we can do to feel more content now and accept
Mm,
that those things are moving you towards greater and deeper health, and not be waiting for something to shift aesthetically or a number on the scale to shift to decide whether or not that is helping you, and
mm,
because when we recognize that we're going to that we when we recognize that we're not trying to reach a specific goal in terms of aesthetics, we can just really be more intuitive about what feels good, what is working for us, how do we actually feel each day. um, Practicing body acceptance is a huge topic. It's a whole conversation in itself. I think there are practices that you can do in terms of affirmations, and a lot of it is undoing learning. It's not
yeah.
learning something new. It's undoing, and it's having a conscious dialogue with yourself, which takes quite a few years to undo. Certainly for me, that you don't have to, that we are being fed nonsense about how we're supposed to look and about what
Mm,
healthy is. We are marketed healthy bodies as but bodies that were on the front of a magazine that could only have been achieved through highly unhealthy dieting and restrictive practices and being told that is the pinnacle of health and that's what we should all be striving to achieve. And I bought into it. I consider myself quite, you know, analytical and, you know, not gullible, but I believed it for years, like that basically the pinnacle of health was leanness. And I think that seeing the lie, like once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And that doesn't mean that you just think, I just do whatever, I eat whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, no, like actually when you let go of the lie, you focus on how you feel, it's a lot easier to stay motivated and to become, like, inculcate these as just habits and becomes your new normal of focusing on eating eating more plants, eating whole foods, moving, etc. I think that letting go of labels of off-limit foods is also really, really important. So, you know, saying like, I can't eat pizza because that is bad for me. It's, you know, it's a junk food. And what happens is your brain subconsciously, whether you know it or not, is rebelling against that and is thinking like, no, but, you know, I want to eat it. Then you develop a kind of sort of obsession with it. And then when you do inevitably end up in a situation where there is pizza, instead of just enjoying it, having your pizza
just a little bit, yeah, whatever, in moderation, you binge.
In moderation, like it becomes a big thing, and you're more likely to end up in a kind of, you know, slight bingy or frantic eating state of mind. So I teach mindful eating to my clients, and actually more than anything else, this is what people are like, this has changed my life. So slow, mindful eating and learning to listen to your satiety, hunger and satiety cues, hunger and fullness cues. So recognize, what does it feel like when I'm gently hungry, and eat then, and learn, what does it feel like when I'm satisfied, not stuffed, and learning to stop at that point rather than eating to the point of like physical discomfort, which it's amazing how many people, or how many of us, me included, like would do that on a almost not just daily but several times a day, you know, end up eating beyond the point of gentle satisfaction rather than you know, going beyond that. And that requires you to eat slowly. So eating slowly is a practical tip that I really believe makes a big difference.
Do you, you know, one of the things that I was thinking about is, as you were talking, is like, if, you know, I have little kids, and in, you know, parenting books or parenting blogs, when they were little, I used to remember reading them saying, you know, don't force feed your child, right? Like, don't try to stuff them, and which I think is a very different from, you know, what probably our parents were told at one point, being like, they need this food, you know, they need to maintain their weight. There's so much pressure. And actually in that young age, it's like to put on weight, right? And to be of a certain average size. And later on, it's sort of the exact opposite, as you said. Do you think that information availability, like media, social media, do you think it's changed people's perception around this concept of, you know, is it, I mean, I think oftentimes people will say like, oh, well, this is a trend, right? This is something, it's a fad when you talk about like, you know, plant-based diets or, you know, whatever. But do you think that their sort of perception of it, or the knowledge that is now getting put out there, it's better, like it's more educated or more scientific than it was before?
I do think it is, slowly but surely. But, you know, it's difficult. It's honestly quite difficult for me to say, because you do obviously end up creating an Instagram echo chamber or whatever. I unfollowed a lot of accounts a couple of years ago, and I really if you think that someone is telling you to, you know, eat only bananas and then go on a juice cleanse and then do this, like just unfollow them and try and surround yourself with what seems like more measured advice. And it's really interesting what you were saying. I follow someone, I don't have children, but I'm really interested in, this idea of like the weaning process and how, and so I follow like a bunch of people who teach this. And it's exactly what you were saying. Like, I think our parents were taught, like, you just have to, and if they don't like something, you either have to keep forcing it until they like it, or you almost say like, oh, they tried it once, oh, they don't like it, oh, they don't like it, oh, don't give her broccoli, she hates it, she won't eat it. And it's actually like with, anybody, the idea is rather than giving them a certain amount on their plate and saying, you have to finish that. And I think even as kids get older, beyond the weaning stage, there's this whole thing around stigma, like, don't waste that food.
Oh, yeah.
Because, there are kids that are starving, and if you don't finish that sort of, clearly there's actually no particular correlation. It's not, it actually, if somebody is not hungry or they don't want to eat something, it doesn't help anybody to force them to eat it. Actually, what helps people, what would help the overall food situation in any community or society overall, would be for everyone to be super aware of their hunger, their satiety, to take portions appropriately, to not, then when food is left over, it's not on their plate, it's still in the pot, which is a lot easier to then package and give away than it is if it's sort of, leftovers on your plate. So getting better at judging portion size, taking small amounts, having a pause, taking more if needed. So going back to the weaning thing, the idea is you give kids lots of options, they choose, they may not like it, but it often, even for adults, it can take us 5 to 20 times of trying something before we actually like it. It doesn't mean we don't like it. So keep giving them options, and then not categorizing them as not liking it, or but more like, well, they've only tried that a couple of times, and allowing them to judge their own satiety. And then as the children get older and beyond weaning, the biggest gift I think that we can give children is being confident and aware of their own hunger and fullness cues. Helping them to learn when they're gently hungry, not ravenous, not letting it get to the ravenous stage, can they, eat something appropriate, and when they are full, to feel confident, say, no, I'm full, I'm satisfied, I don't want to feel stuffed. And taking away labels of what is good and bad, but rather just helping them to develop their taste buds so that they enjoy eating well. I know as an adult, it was a lot easier for me to eat healthily when I enjoyed eating healthily. Not like before, when I was like, well, I have to eat healthily because I'm on a diet and that means eating this, and like, but really, really I want to be eating that junk food. And when I stopped saying I couldn't eat the junk food, I actually stopped wanting to eat it as much. And I have a much more relaxed relationship with what would typically be considered, unhealthy food, in the sense that I can sort of take it or leave it. And that I never thought I would get to, because for me, it was always like quite difficult.
Yeah. No, and I think it can be, right, for most people, because it's a commitment, right? It's a different kind of a commitment, and a commitment to sort of yourself in a way. And like you said, unwiring, undoing of sort of so much that we learn in society and like what we grow up with. So taking, we've been talking about, I think, the individual for a while. So like just let's, lifting it up, right? And taking it more to, a global perspective, or not, even a national perspective. Our planet is in some amount of trouble, and food sustainability is a huge topic of discussion, and really needs to become a topic of action. And a lot of people, I think, are doing good work in that area. But the mass food industry which exists, which really, I mean, it in a way, it's sort of that dual-edged sword, right? Because you need to produce, because we have a growing population and everyone needs to be fed, and we want zero hunger, obviously, but on the other side, there are so many bad practices, and there's a huge amount of wastage as well
Yeah,
in terms of, the food that's actually being produced and the food that's being consumed. The gap is actually quite huge, much more than what most people realize. How do
yeah,
you think that in organizations like such as Tamara, right, the ones which are in travel and tourism and hospitality, where food is such an integral part of our experience, restaurants as well, of course, how do you think that many of us should be? I mean, how do you think we should think about it? This issue? How do you think that we can push ourselves towards becoming profitable while still being more to be by being conscious while being conscious of
yeah.
these sort of issues, and also at the same time drive awareness towards clean eating and better eating and whole foods?
Yes. I think it's a couple of different things. It's practices and it's how we market things as organizations. I mean, for us, I mean, Copper and Cloves is much smaller than the Tamara, and that makes it a little bit easier. But we are working towards, again, we can't label ourselves as like a zero waste cafe yet, but we're working towards it, and we're working in dialogue with our vendors, for example. So we do choose vendors who provide things in either recyclable or no packaging, and when we have had vendors who were providing things, say, wrapped in plastic, like why people cling film wrap things like fruits and vegetables which have a skin, so talking to them about that and saying, look, we are going to switch vendor unless you can sort this out. And we have had amazing, I mean, increasingly in India, we are increasingly getting things given to us wrapped in banana leaves with a piece of string rather than in plastic. So that is a result of the pressure that people like us are applying. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, I mean, that has been a really positive thing. And prioritizing vendors who do, say, provide us, for ages we were making our own oat milk. We didn't really have the space, but I couldn't find a vendor who was where I was happy with the packaging until I found, until a new one was launched, which was given in glass bottles, which we also then can reuse in our own packaging. So it's like a really nice circular economy, and they take them back and refill them, and it works really well in that sense. I think there's obviously an issue of some food waste, and tying up with composting. If we're in a city like we are, tying up with a composting company to pick it up and actually compost it properly, rather than just put it in wet waste and assume that it is going to be going to some amazing compost heap when it's probably not, unfortunately. So that's another small thing that we kind of do. I do, and this is a really difficult one, having said, and I am, I'm not on a crusade to make people vegan. That's not my aim, and it's not my brand. But at the same time, I made Copper and Cloves fully 100% vegan because I didn't want to be contributing to the industries that I know aren't good for the environment, in terms of, I think in India, people find it very difficult to hear, but the dairy industry in India is just as bad as any video you've seen on social media, in terms of the treatment of animals, in terms of, the waste, in terms of everything, really. It's not a good place. And I think that limiting, as an organization, say the Tamara, like limiting the meat offerings, say in the resorts. So rather than there being something for everyone, it's actually saying, like, we have one meat dish today. This is the special. We've got the meat. because then sourcing is so much easier. Of course, it's not possible to source humanely raised and really good quality, organic. It's hard to source organic and humanely raised meat if you're doing it at scale. The more the scale is, the harder that becomes, the pricing and just generally the supply chain. So I do think, reducing meat offering, having a non-veg tariff if it's an all-you-can-eat situation. I mean, those are just because we do know that is a big part of it. And I know you guys do so much in terms of organic and growing your own. I've seen, because I've been involved in the documenting of it, the sustainable practices at the resorts. That's amazing. I think that I do feel that reducing meat offerings is an important part of moving towards a more sustainable practice of, within the hospitality. And I'm not saying that every single place should be vegan. I'm just saying, like, how can we make it more sustainable and produce oriented? I think, again, there is a big thing in marketing and us as in the hospitality sector taking the responsibility of making plant-based food and organic, healthy food taste amazing. I do think that sadly, like, it has been an afterthought, not necessarily, in terms of, there's always delicious vegetarian options in India. That is an amazing thing, because it's not been the case when, like, in the UK, it's just like, oh, the vegetarian option is a stuffed pepper and that's it. It's like that typical kind of afterthought, because so much of the population in India is vegetarian. It's much less of an issue here, but in terms of sort of healthy, clean eating, I think that there is more that the culinary schools need to do in terms of, at the base, getting our staff to be able to know how to make amazing, healthy salad dressings and not relying on imported, American Garden, not trying to shame specific brands, but like imported, salad dressings or condiments to like make it taste good. So yeah, I think there is some work in this country, particularly in the continental food side of things, to improve healthy plant-based eating within, like, at the source within culinary schools. And
I think, from my experience with hotels and with restaurants before that, was that, if you could provide tasty vegetarian food, there would be, not everyone who is non-vegetarian would be convinced to have that, but oftentimes, like, as people are coming in more and more, excuse me, they would start trying those vegetarian options because they would hear how tasty it was, and they would end up picking it over the other options because they realized, hey, listen, this is actually, surprisingly for them, this is really tasty. So I think flavor, as you're saying, makes a huge difference.
It is.
Like, if you could, and like you said, I think this point that you were making, I've never thought about this, but in terms of the basic materials that you need to make like a salad dressing, those are things which are quite available to us. And it actually, one of the things I always say about sustainability in our industry is that most of the time it makes business sense to do that.
Exactly.
To go, like, it's really easy to make a salad dressing and it doesn't cost a lot of money. It probably costs a lot less than buying the bottled stuff. And not only is it tasty, it's also fresh. And
exactly, it has a much better flavor, and you can have much more variety. And that point about not importing is another part of sustainability. So one thing, Copper and Cloves is we are global in the type of cuisine. It's Middle Eastern, Indian, it's Mediterranean, it's Sri Lankan, you know, it's sort of Pan-Asian. It is not, but we don't use imported produce. So that's our whole thing. I mean, we struggle with olive oil, so we do use imported olive oil. But other than that, but I've challenged myself now to try and, like, you know, learn to make salad dressings with different oils that are available in India, and not just like rely on the default kind of olive oil as the base.
Right.
And I think that yeah, doing that bit of extra work, like for example, you know, we're getting capers from India now. Capers are a great way of adding flavor to continental food, and they're almost all imported, but they are being grown here, and just taking the time to kind of find those sources of, you know, when we're talking about hospitality and we're talking about high-end, you know, restaurants and hotels, we're in the service industry. We can't say like, well, we're just going to give some plain, boring things and expect people to want to choose them. Like, it's, you know, I feel really strong, like it's our job to make that food taste as delicious as possible, and advocate for local produce and choosing sustainable local produce, not by, you know, having a leaflet about it, but by the food tasting amazing, and then, you know, being able to explain that, like, everything that you've just eaten has been sourced from South India, kind of thing. So, I mean, again, you guys are already leading the way in terms of coffee and cacao also being, you know, we use only ethically sourced cacao in the cafe, and we use cacao in quite a lot of things to get that chocolate, healthy chocolate flavor. And I think that what is available in India is amazing, and it is about ensuring that we do, you know, exhaust everything available locally before we start importing things, and get people out of the mindset that good continental food or good food that isn't from India includes like imported balsamic vinegar. Like, you don't need balsamic vinegar to make continental food taste good, right? And balsamic vinegar is not something I've been able to no one is making it here. So we use, like, you know, but you can use apple cider vinegar or, you know, a locally brewed vinegar and make a delicious salad dressing. You don't need imported truffle or mozzarella or whatever. Like, you can find those things, or alternatives, or plant-based alternatives like vegan cheeses right here. And that's, I think, a really important part of the carbon footprint.
In fact, I was going to say that, you know, I don't think what you're talking about really is limited to luxury in any way. We have farms at all of our hotels. So including our business hotels and our mid-segment hotels, we do, you know, rooftop farming.
Yeah,
And,
that's so
or
amazing.
you know, if we have a little bit of land in the back, we do farming there, and then we use that produce in the restaurant. I think that's become much, I mean, one thing is that there's a lot of knowledge around that now, like behind, like, you know, balcony farming, roof farming, and all of that. And I think that's really cool. But it is something that businesses can do. And, you know, usually your team is the one who's sort of really interested in that, you know, and driving that forward. So I think
that's
for,
amazing.
You know, hotels and restaurants, like, it's a team building project practically. And it's not, it makes not only sense from a sustainability, you know, food focused perspective, it also makes a lot of sense from profitability. And I really believe that that's something to go after, you know,
and job satisfaction of the people that work there, because they have some variety and that they might, you know, be more involved in growing. And then it has this amazing, like, you know, effect of passing that on. If those people go and get jobs somewhere else, they might start, you know, teach that institution how to start a little garden, you know, on their rooftop. So it's amazing that you're doing that. I think that's a really good initiative. We don't have any outside space, so we just, you know, grow very, very little, but it would be a dream, you know, of mine to have to do something like that. So
maybe microgreens. I think microgreens are like
microgreens. We do. That's the one thing that we have done, but we actually just because we don't have literally like any space. I think when we do, you know, like if we can eventually have somewhere where we did have a terrace, we'll definitely come to you for advice.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've run out of time. This has been an incredible conversation.
It's been so
Thank
nice
you
to
so
talk.
much.
No, thank
Yeah, this
you.
has been so nice. And thank you for all of the insight that you bring to this and for the work that you do. It's really, like I said, I'm a fan. I'm a customer, I'm a fan. But beyond that, sort of the message that you put out there about really, how to make clean eating something which is possible in your life by adding flavor to it and making it fit into the practicality and, of our daily lives. So thank you for that.
No, thank
Um,
you for having me and for everything you guys are doing as well. It's always very inspiring to see
Thank you.
an organization of a very different scale, doing something that.
Thanks so much. And thank you everyone for logging in and checking us out and, watching this conversation,
Yeah,
contributing.
thank you.
And thank you to my team, who's, as always, is amazing and,
Yeah,
and helped us put everything together in the back.
set these things up.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And everyone, if you are available tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we're going to be having another conversation. This will be with Poonam Kasturi, who, I don't know, Sarah, if you know her, but she's amazing. She founded Daily Dump, which is a company
Oh
that
yeah,
provides,
yeah. I know her. Yeah.
yeah. So Daily
Amazing.
Dump provides a variety of products and services to help individuals make the switch to a low waste life. So including food waste, for sure. And
Absolutely.
actually,
I have their composter on my balcony, the big
yeah,
composter. Yeah, it's amazing. And they help you set it up so well.
yeah. And in fact, one of their very, very early prototypes is what we use in the Tamara Kurg. And we've been
Yeah,
using it for, now like 10, 11 years. And it's in great shape and it still works. And we produce tons of compost every,
yeah.
really on a monthly basis. So
It's amazing.
it's an amazing organization. We'll be talking to her, and she'll be also discussing how each of us can make simple changes in our own lives to kind of be a part of the solution towards low waste. So thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank
And
you so
make
much.
sure
I'm
you,
definitely going to be tuning into that. I really love all the work that they do. I have lots of their products, so I'll definitely be tuning in to get a few more tips.
amazing. Thanks. See you.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.